Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking something we all know and love, chocolate, and turning it into a massive, historical, and honestly fascinating scientific tasting journey. I mean, think about it. Most of us just unwrap a bar, take a bite, and don't give it a second thought. But as we pull back the layers of history, chemistry, and culinary innovation today, we're going to uncover a wildly diverse canvas of flavors and textures. So, get ready. We are about to dive straight into the brilliant science and, yeah, a few really happy accidents that gave us the chocolate varieties we completely obsess over today.
Okay, so here is our tasting menu for the day. We'll start off with Section 1, the classic chocolate foundations. Then we'll shift gears into Section 2, Beyond Brown, color innovations. After that, Section 3 dives into craft cacao and single origins. And finally, we'll wrap things up with Section 4, Old World Chocolate Traditions. Let's get right to it.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the Classics Chocolate Foundations.
All right, before we get into the wild colors and the modern culinary science, we really have to look back, and I mean way back. The cacao tree was actually first cultivated by the Olmecs in Mesoamerica around 1500 BCE. The Mayans and Aztecs prized these cacao beans so highly, they literally used them as money. Just imagine paying for things with chocolate. But the dark chocolate they knew and the dark chocolate we eat today, totally different experiences. Nowadays, you'll often see these massive numbers like 99% slapped on premium bars. By legal definition, to even be called dark chocolate, a bar only needs to hit at least 50% cacao solids. But the ultra-premium versions, they soar way higher. That percentage basically just tells you how much of the bar comes straight from the cacao bean versus added sugar. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't a 99% bar just feel like eating a handful of dry dirt? Well, the secret comes down to a 19th century Belgian invention called conching. It basically involves endlessly grinding and smoothing the chocolate for hours, sometimes even days, just to achieve that famously smooth, melt-in-your-mouth texture. It is, honestly, pure mechanical alchemy.
And that brings us to one of my absolute favorite themes in food science, accidental genius. Back in 1875, a Swiss chocolatier named Daniel Peter had this brilliant idea to combine milk and chocolate. Sounds simple, right? Well, there was a massive problem. Milk contains water, and water causes chocolate to seize up, spoil, and just completely separate. It's a total disaster. He actually struggled with this exact problem for 8 agonizing years. The breakthrough? It only happened when he walked next door and partnered with his neighbor, a guy you might have heard of, Henri Nestle. Nestle had literally just invented powdered milk. So by removing the water from the equation, boom, they created the world's very first stable milk chocolate.
Milk chocolate was pretty much an instant hit, obviously, but it didn't taste the exact same everywhere. Have you ever noticed that American milk chocolate, like a classic Hershey's bar, has a really specific flavor when you compare it to a European bar? The European standard is incredibly creamy, requiring at least 10% cacao and 12% milk solids. But the American flavor profile features this really distinct sour tang. So, why the difference? Well, it was actually born out of pure historical necessity. Before we had widespread refrigeration, Hershey's used a specific technique to partially lipolyze the milk just to preserve it. That preservation method fundamentally altered the flavor of the milk proteins, creating this slightly tangy taste that eventually just became the absolute gold standard for the American palate.
Moving right along to Section 2, Beyond Brown, color innovations.
Okay, so now we are moving on to the absolute rule breakers of our tasting menu, because as it turns out, some of the most fascinating chocolates in the world aren't even brown. If you break down the minimum requirements for white chocolate, you've got 20% cocoa butter, 14% milk solids, and 66% sugar and other ingredients. Notice anything missing? Yep, you might be wondering, where on earth are the cacao solids? Well, there aren't any. And that is exactly why hardcore chocolate purists, and actually the FDA up until 2004, flat out refused to legally call it real chocolate. Because it relies entirely on cocoa butter, which just so happens to melt right at human body temperature, it is notoriously tricky for chefs to work with. But paradoxically, that exact same quality is why modern chocolatiers absolutely love it. Without the heavy, dominant flavor of cacao solids getting in the way, white chocolate acts like this flawless, creamy blank canvas. It's perfect for carrying really delicate flavors like matcha, vanilla, or freeze-dried fruits.
But what happens when you treat that white chocolate just a little bit, well, wrong? Back in 2006, French pastry chef Frédéric Bao accidentally left some white chocolate in a warm water bath, known as a bain-marie, and he just forgot about it. Hours passed, but instead of burning into a total disaster, that gentle 120 degrees Celsius heat triggered something called the Maillard reaction. Now, this is the exact same chemical process that beautifully browns a steak or toasts a piece of bread. The milk proteins in the white chocolate slowly caramelized, creating this incredible golden blonde chocolate loaded with rich, toasty notes of shortbread and salted caramel. It was a complete, literal mistake, but it was so incredibly good that Valrhona beautifully commercialized it in 2012 under the name Dulce.
And then the whole industry got a massive shock in 2017 when Barry Callebaut announced Ruby Chocolate. Now let me be absolutely clear. This is not just white chocolate dyed pink. No way. It actually took 13 years of intense research to unlock this specific flavor profile. Researchers discovered that certain unfermented beans sourced from Ecuador, Brazil, and the Ivory Coast naturally contain these chemical precursors. When processed in exactly the right way, those beans turn the chocolate a brilliant, vibrant pink. And the crazy part? It naturally yields this tart, citrusy, berry-like flavor without a single drop of added fruit or artificial coloring. Honestly, it is an absolute marvel of modern food science.
Let's jump into Section 3, Craft Cocoa and Single Origins.
So, right around the early 2000s, a movement kicked off that completely shifted the chocolate paradigm. Instead of just blending beans from all over the world into one uniform, predictable flavor, chocolatiers started treating cacao exactly like fine wine. This is the perfect illustration of terroir, the idea that the soil, the climate, and the surrounding environment dictate the final flavor. When you source beans from just a single estate, like the tiny isolated village of Chuao in Venezuela, the results are wildly distinct. I mean, that specific region produces just 20 tons a year. You can literally only get there by boat, and it's widely considered the rarest and finest cacao in the entire world. Compare that to beans from Madagascar, which give you a super punchy, fruity, acidic chocolate, or Ecuadorian Nacional beans, which just burst with these really prominent floral notes. It's absolutely fascinating. The environment literally writes the recipe.
But, it's not just about where the bean is grown. It's also about how much heat it's exposed to. Traditional chocolate-making methods roast the beans at up to 140 degrees Celsius. That high heat kills bacteria and develops all those deep, smooth, rich flavors we instantly recognize. Raw chocolate makers, on the other hand, they meticulously keep their temperatures under 42 degrees Celsius. The goal there is to preserve the natural enzymes and antioxidants. But because it totally lacks that high heat needed to develop the sugars and smooth out the paste, raw chocolate delivers a dramatically grittier, highly bitter, and frankly astringent tasting experience. It's essentially chocolate in its most primal, unprocessed state.
And finally, Section 4, Old World Chocolate Traditions.
Now, if raw chocolate is all about stripping away modern processing, these next historical oddities completely defy the smooth, creamy textures we've all come to expect today. They rely on centuries-old techniques. Get this, more like eating flavored stone than creamy chocolate. That is literally how people describe Modica chocolate from Sicily. It's a 16th century Aztec-style recipe that was actually brought over by the Spanish. Remember that conching process we talked about earlier? The one that makes dark chocolate super smooth? Well, Modica chocolate just skips it completely. It's processed strictly below 40 degrees Celsius. Because it's so cool, the sugar crystals never fully dissolve. So the result is a bar that actually crumbles and snaps in your mouth. It creates this unforgettable sandy texture that's traditionally seasoned with stuff like chili pepper or cinnamon. Seriously, it doesn't melt, it crunches.
All right, now I want you to contrast that gritty texture with something incredibly silky, traditional Gianduja. Composed of 70% chocolate and 30% Piedmont hazelnut paste, this is essentially the highly sophisticated, luxurious ancestor to modern spreads like Nutella. But the crazy thing is, it was actually born out of a wartime crisis. During the Napoleonic Wars in Turin, Italy, a British blockade made cacao incredibly scarce and just impossibly expensive. So to stretch their dwindling supply, these ingenious chocolatiers started blending their chocolate with a paste made from local, delicate hazelnuts. It was purely an economic workaround, but it ended up creating one of the absolute most beloved, velvety flavor combinations in human history.
To really trace this massive evolution, we have to recognize that long before chocolate was ever formed into a solid bar that you could unwrap, it was actually something you drank. The Mayans and Aztecs consumed it as a cold, intensely bitter beverage that they spiced up with chili peppers. But when the Spanish brought it back to Europe in the 1500s, they added sugar and started serving it hot exclusively for the aristocracy. Eventually, places like France and Italy took it a step further and began melting actual solid chocolate directly into milk. This created chocolate chaud, a drink so intensely thick you practically need a spoon just to eat it. And over in Vienna, oh, they took it even further, taking that deliciously thick, melted decadence and topping it with absolute mountains of whipped cream.
Wow,
We've really journeyed from 99% bitter cacao solids all the way to the totally accidental invention of milk chocolate. We've watched white chocolate completely transform into golden blonde and seen how single-origin beans can literally dictate flavor through the very soil they grow in. We've even tasted the gritty, sugary crunch of 16th century recipes. So, looking at all these remarkable, scientifically distinct varieties out there, here is my final question for you. What does true chocolate mean to you? And more importantly, which one are you going to taste next? I really hope this explainer has given you a newfound appreciation for the science and the rich history hiding inside every single bite, and I hope it leaves you incredibly eager to expand your own personal tasting menu. Thanks so much for exploring with me today, and hey, really enjoy your next piece of chocolate.